Most of us treat the calendar as a simple utility, a grid of uniform boxes used to track deadlines, doctor appointments, and the weekend. But zoom in on any single one of those squares, like July 8th, and you find a staggering bottleneck of human history. Centuries of turning points are crammed into this exact 24-hour window. To see how these centuries overlap, we can follow the specific timelines of physical mapping, the violent exchange of political power, and the sudden cultural shocks that rewired our collective attention. Excavating a single date like an archaeological dig reveals something crucial about human history. It isn't just a timeline of isolated incidents. It is a relentless, continuous cycle happening all at once. For most of our existence, the globe was heavily fragmented. Isolated populations were eventually driven by an urgent need to cross physical boundaries and connect those separate worlds. On July 8, 1497, Portuguese explorer Vasco da Gama set sail. His fleet bypassed the traditional bottlenecked overland Silk Road, establishing the first direct maritime path to India around the coast of Africa. It permanently restructured the economics of global trade. Nearly 4 centuries later, on July 8, 1853, the method of exploration had evolved into coercion. Commodore Matthew Perry arrived in Edo Bay with a fleet of warships, using the threat of military force to compel a heavily secluded Japan to open its borders to Western commerce. Eventually, humans ran out of oceans to cross. The frontier shifted from mapping coastlines in the 19th century to navigating low Earth orbit in the 21st. On July 8, 2011, the Space Shuttle Atlantis sat on the launch pad at the Kennedy Space Center, prepped for its final mission, STS-135. When Atlantis lifted off, it marked the definitive end to the United States Space Shuttle program, closing a 30-year chapter of orbital operations. Look at these 3 events together. From mastering wind and ocean currents, to deploying steam-powered warships, to igniting millions of pounds of rocket propellant, July 8th maps a direct trajectory of humanity pushing against its physical limits. July 8th also records the internal architecture of the state, mapping the moments when empires are forged, power is claimed, and governments violently collapse. In 1709, European dominance was decided on the battlefield of Poltava. The Swedish military was decisively crushed, stripping Sweden of its status as a major superpower on the continent. The victor, Peter the Great, seized that momentum to consolidate control. The battle served as the bloody inception point for what would immediately become the modern Russian Empire. Sometimes power is secured without a cavalry charge. On July 8, 1776, John Nixon stood in a Philadelphia yard and delivered the first public reading of the Declaration of Independence. By formalizing a local rebellion into a recognized sovereign state, the document provided a legal and ideological framework to disrupt British rule. It triggered a geopolitical ripple effect across the Atlantic. Centuries of history might be required to build a nation's power structure, but modern political stability can be shattered in an instant. On July 8, 2022, former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe was shot and killed with an improvised firearm during a campaign speech, an act of resentment that stunned one of the world's most stable democracies. Within the confines of July 8th, you can track the life cycle of geopolitical power. We see its violent battlefield inception, its legal declaration, and its sudden, shocking vulnerability. Outside of military campaigns and state decrees, history is forged by the moments that seize the public imagination and shape mass culture. On July 8, 1889, the first issue of the Wall Street Journal was published. It standardized financial reporting, taking chaotic market data and turning it into an accessible daily narrative for the public. Decades later, a very different kind of media report captivated the country. On July 8, 1947, radio broadcasts announced that a UFO had crashed in Roswell, New Mexico, permanently injecting the concept of extraterrestrial conspiracy into modern pop culture. Today, print media and radio broadcasts have been heavily augmented by the immediate, unified spectacle of live television broadcasting. During the 2014 FIFA World Cup, host nation Brazil took the field against Germany on July 8th. What followed was a historic 7-1 collapse, a match now famously dubbed the Mineraço. Viewers watched an elite national team systematically dismantled on their home turf. Millions of people experienced collective, real-time disbelief, creating a shared psychological trauma across the host nation. Whether it's the democratization of financial news, the birth of an urban myth, or the collapse of a sports dynasty on live television, culture is solidified through these moments of shared public shock. There is no hidden magnetism or grand design to July 8th. Mathematically, it is no more magical or predestined than any other day on the calendar. The density of events that occurred on this one day is simply evidence of the relentless, overwhelming volume of human endeavor happening simultaneously, around the clock, century after century. Vasco da Gama's sails, the ringing of the Liberty Bell, and the space shuttle Atlantis are all distinct coordinates on one continuous timeline of ambition. History functions as a continuous process rather than a finished record. Every hour on today's calendar is currently forging the anniversaries of the future.